Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Hi, everyone. Bill Podojil is on the show today to talk about his new book, The Poseidon Project. In the story, a retiree's life is upended when her husband vanishes during a Middle Eastern business trip, propelling her and an eclectic group of companions into a high-stakes adventure filled with unexpected twists, evolving family dynamics, and exotic locales. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. E.William Podojil is an international business executive and novelist. He has traveled extensively and visited over 60 countries while based in Europe and the USA. Podojil works as an executive business advisor, strategist, and coach, while also pursuing his love of storytelling and writing. His first novel, The 10th Man, was published in 2004. His second novel, The Poseidon Project, will be published in August 2024 by the Wild Rose Press and is the first in the Herb Society Mysteries, a series of adventure thrillers. Besides showcasing his published work, Podojil writes personal, humorous stories of his life and travels with his husband and 3 sons. You can learn more about Bill Podojil and his work at www.ewpodojil.com. Well, hi, Bill. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Hello, how are you?
Great. It's good to have you on the show. Why don't you kick things off for us? Tell us a little bit about your book. What is the Poseidon Project about? And what inspired you to write this first installment of the Herb Society Mysteries?
So in 2 different parts, the Herb Society Mysteries is about a group of retired women who have a shared past together, and they get pulled into kind of a few capers in terms of mysteries and some pretty high stakes technological suspense situations that they get pulled into kind of unwittingly in some way. So the Poseidon Project is the first book in the series, and it is ultimately where you begin to learn about Molly Halloran, who is the lead, if you will, of the 4 women friends, and then some of her family members that get pulled into this caper, which ultimately ends up becoming the Poseidon Project, which I'll talk a little bit about. And then they end up kind of in this international intrigue thriller, more or less trying to solve a pretty disturbing and a pretty scary mystery or a potential technology that can do some pretty bad things.
Oh, wow. So do they take this on themselves, or did they have any help during their adventure?
At first, you think of these women, they're retired, they've worked together, they have a shared past together, and they're just trying to more or less kind of kick back and enjoy their retirement. However, each one of them is struggling a little bit about with finding purpose and kind of are, quite frankly, a little bit bored with their lives. And quite out of the blue, Molly, the main character, her husband is declared missing while he's on a business trip overseas. And that's kind of what reignites the 4 friends to say, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to figure this out? Who do we go to? And then Molly calls her son, who happens to be a technology executive, and he gets pulled into it as well. And so that was kind of the premise. As the story develops, you kind of understand what this technology is that has been actually stolen and what was ultimately the reason for her husband being kidnapped and held for ransom. So they start out alone, but they end up pulling in Molly's son and some other folks to help them solve the mystery.
Oh, I love that story. It's different, it's very unique. I love that you're featuring 4 retired women. Yay.
Yeah. Well, I hit that retirement age where I decided to step back a little bit and just try to do something new a couple of years ago. And so it was retirement, but not really retirement. It was kind of like a reset and in finding some new things to do, writing being one of those. And so the idea had been on my mind for, a couple of years, just thinking like, what do people do in their second or third act of their life? And so it really kind of started from that point and built. One of the funny things is the core of this is that it all started from a story, kind of a joke between my mother and me. And I used to do a lot of international travel, like to far-flung places all over the world. And so my mother, who's very sarcastic and very funny, and she would come back saying, I don't even understand what you do. And I think you can't tell me what you do because I think that there's something else kind of underlying all this, like you're a spy or something like that. And that's kind of how this started. And of course, over the years, we just continued to fuel it with jokes. And so I had this little idea of these four, women who are just kind of playing golf and playing tennis and just, hanging out together. But they've got this like real kind of badass past that nobody really knows about. And then they have to dust it all off and really put it back into action again.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I should have had your mother on the show.
I know. She was one of the first people to actually read the manuscript even before it became contracted and decided to be published. So yeah, she's been my muse and also my support throughout the whole process. So
Yeah, that's
no,
wonderful. She's probably
no.
thinking, oh, okay, it's all starting to make a little sense now.
Yeah.
So tell us about your lead character, Molly Halloran.
hmm
Describe her character a little bit for us. What makes her stand out?
So Molly, in I'd say some basic ways, is based upon my mom. And Molly is the matriarch of her family. She's the de facto leader of the groups of her three friends. The way I kind of describe her at the beginning, she's tired. She's lived a life. She's had a family. She's a grandmother. She's had a career, built this beautiful house, and her husband, the two of them live in this house, and he has a company that she helped build. And she's just tired. And she's kind of got to that point where, for lack of a better word, is this all there is?
Mm,
She's achieved some pretty amazing things, but she would never go tooting her own horn. She looks at her life as successful, that she was able to be there as a mother, as a friend, as a professional, but doesn't particularly look back on her life as being anything, that she would be bragging about.
mhm.
So she was tired, but also a bit adrift, kind of in this in between, like, okay, now I've done all this kind of stuff, but I likely have another, 2 to 3 decades left to be
Right.
doing something, and I'm not sure what that's going to be. And so it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
She gets pulled into something that ultimately kind of gives her group back.
Right. Now, why the Herb Society Mysteries? How does that name come into play?
Yeah, a lot of people ask that. For me, it was two things. First of all, the HERB happens to be the first letter in the last names of each one of the friends. So when they were in their 20s and they were kind of living this kind of crazy life, doing what they were doing, they developed that name as kind of a code word for their group. And so it really has nothing to do with herbs. It has nothing other than just the initials of their four last names. And so they keep it as kind of like their club name, for lack of a better word. And because, they're now still social, they're hanging out together. And when they talk about the herb society with each other, they know what that means. And they know it reflects back to a time of their lives that's very different than it is now. But it just stuck and it continues kind of as their identification point.
Okay, that's very clever. Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit about the group dynamics. How did their varied experiences come into play during the actual crisis?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is from the outset, they would look like four women in their late 60s, early 70s having lunch every Wednesday at the club in their little compound. But as you would pull back and start understanding what each one of these people do, you find out that they, have their own individual talents. They have their own lives. They've had their own, strengths, weaknesses, and certainly their own kind of way to react to things. So we have Betty Bao, who is a Vietnamese immigrant from when her parents came to the United States, and she's like the very tough, very direct, kind of sarcastic, very no-nonsense lady. We have Linda Eastman. She and her husband never had children, but she was a great teacher. She enjoyed traveling around with her husband, who is now deceased, and is, again, just kind of, what do I do now at this stage of my life that I'm a widow? And a lot of talking about the things that the two of them used to do just because they, it was just the two of them and they had the freedom to travel all over the world whenever they wanted to. And then we have Donna Rivero, who you come to find out she's got all these hidden talents that you really didn't know, but she's a little bit of the surprise character, very quiet. She's been living with a female roommate for 20 to 25 years. Never talks about the nature of their relationship. The other three women assume that Donna and her roommate are a couple, but Donna doesn't want to talk about it and things like that. So it's just kind of this, very private on some levels, very connected on other levels. Certainly they're very tight, but they're also very individual, if that helps describe them.
Yeah. I want to talk about the locations because you got Dubai. That's a significant location to the setting. What kind of inspired this choice, and how did you research the area to accurately portray the location?
So Dubai is just kind of an amazing place, and amazing from the standpoint whether you like it or don't like it there. It's amazing just because of the vast amount of wealth that's there. And I had been there many, many years ago prior to the pandemic, and Dubai had not yet really come into its existence like it is today. And so as I was writing about it, I thought, this is really a crossroad kind of place. Dubai's become and has built itself as a huge international and a hub between the West and the East. So, Europe, North America, and then the Middle East, and then China, India, Japan, and areas like that. So I decided to go back. I was like, you know what? I'm going to just go. And so I booked a ticket and I went for a week. And I walked around and looked at the locations that I had written about from memory. And I just wanted to verify and talk to some people there just to see how things had changed, if they hadn't changed. And again, I think one of the key things that I came away from it, learning from my discussions with people, are that there are basically two groups of people that live in Dubai. It's the Emirati, the people that are the citizens of the United Arab Emirates, and everybody else. And just about everybody else is either literally in servitude, like working as, domestic help and things like that. That's not really servitude, but in service roles for individual, palaces and things like that, as well as in the hospitality segment and areas like that, plus in international finance. And Dubai's become this huge banking center. And going back there, it was probably about a 10-year gap between going there the first time and going back. It was just insane, really, just how much building and how much wealth is there, and how everything is built on oil, the money coming from oil and petroleum and things like that. So just immense amounts of wealth.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw a taxi in Dubai that was a Rolls Royce, and, it was black and yellow driving down the street. And I'm like, okay, well, we're not in Kansas anymore here. And just things like that are so different than we probably would see in the North America, the USA, Canada, even Western Europe. And again, it's all really built upon this massive infrastructure that they built in terms of international commerce, transport, and of course the underlying wealth just due to natural resources, namely petroleum.
Yeah, yeah, 'cause they're the richest people in the world, aren't
You
they? I
know,
think so.
yeah. So one of the things that I did when I was there, I did two touristy things. One of them was going up to the top of the Burj Khalifa, which is literally a half mile tall, which is,
Mm.
when you think about for a building being that tall.
Oh,
And yeah, and
scary.
I'm not super great with heights, so I was like, okay, this is going to be a challenge, but it was pretty amazing. And then the other thing was going to the Dubai Mall, which is the largest mall, I think one of the largest enclosed structures in the world. And because it's so hot there, think about like several city blocks are covered and air conditioned. And you walk through this massive, massive mall. I'm not a shopper. I don't like to shop. And so there's a Tiffany store that is bigger than my house
Oh my gosh.
inside the mall with a line of people. You have to have an appointment to be able to get in, or it's just unbelievable. And there are people, yeah, just walking around and, with Tiffany bags and, you name it, Cartier and other, just shopping there like I would shop at a Target or something.
Right.
It was pretty amazing. You have three-star Michelin restaurant was inside the mall, as well as a full-scale aquarium with sharks and
Oh my goodness.
just like I'm in a mall. I mean, really, this is the food court is a three-star Michelin restaurant, And again, it's just everything there seems to be over the top. Not in a judgmental over the top. It's just things you can't even possibly imagine. Like,
Right.
wow, really. And so I just thought it would be a good contrast to where the story starts out, which is in another desert halfway around the world in Tucson, Arizona.
Oh yeah. I love that you have kind of just brought in your personal travel experiences to the story because I think readers can just feel that connection, because you're there, you're able to not just describe it from looking at pictures on the internet. You were there, you could feel it and smell it and taste it. And I think that really makes the
Yeah.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And again, I think, having been to, I think 65 countries I've been to, something like that around the world. And, each place is so unique that I've been to and you can't pick that up. It's certainly sensory things like smell and the
Right.
taste of food and things like that. That's why even my second book is going to be also about another place that I've spent a lot of time in. And, I just think that brings authenticity to the story. And it talks about Dubai. Yes, from the outset, it's very, yeah, over the top and very luxurious and glamorous. But at the same time, it's also just home
Yeah.
for a lot of people. I lived in Europe for over a decade, almost a decade and a half, and that gave me such a vantage point to be able to kind of leapfrog to different cities around the world. But at the end of the day, wherever you are, it just becomes home.
Right.
It's exciting, it's glamorous, it's scary. I mean, whatever it is, and then it just becomes home.
Yeah. Your story blends family drama with international intrigue. How did you strike a balance between these elements in your storytelling?
As well as being a writer, I'm a huge reader. And to me, you can have a thriller, an action book, psychological thriller, whatever those things are. And I can really get into those. But if I don't connect with the characters and they don't become somehow real to me, then I just have a hard time getting super invested in that story. So I think when I decided to write Poseidon Project, it was, the glamour, the glitz, there's private jets, there's, all this kind of surface thing that makes this look like a really sexy international spy thriller. But then, you've got the same family dynamics, the parental child strains, all those kinds of things that at least most of us that I know, certainly me, we have those kinds of dynamics in our family. So I thought it brought a little bit more authenticity to the story to actually have what I call these unsuspecting heroes. I mean, these are just normal people that end up falling into this big story. And as I've gotten older in my life and career and I've met people that I just thought couldn't possibly have the same family dynamics that I do. For example, nothing bad or good, just, they're living on another planet, in my view. They're just like me. I mean, they're just like us. We're all kind of dealing with the same things. We have children, we have aging parents, we have pets, we have friends, we have jobs, we have stress. All those kinds of things, I think, make us authentic and, human beings that can connect with each other because of those stories. So,
Hmm.
and that's why I built that in. I think that's what makes it more real.
Yeah, that's another thing that a reader will pick up on too is that authenticity. Does the
Hmm.
author enjoy his characters? Is he invested in the characters? Because if he's not, why should I be?
Hmm.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
I've read some books where, the main character is like perfect, square-jawed, handsome, rich, you know, or, the female version of that and no flaws and never wrong and all those kinds of things. And from a, like, yeah, it would be nice to be like occasionally. I think that's one thing. But when you're actually getting into a story that has high stakes involved or potential life and death types of consequences, to me, it's just that's kind of what brings it all together is that we're all people at the end of the day. And whatever we are up against, we're dealing with it with whatever we have in our toolbox
Yeah.
to be able to deal with.
Yeah. You really packed a lot into this story. I love it. There's an LGBTQ subplot involving Molly's son.
Hmm.
What motivated this storyline, and how does it intersect with the main plot?
Yes, it does. First of all, it does intersect with the main plot. And Lucas Halloran, who's Molly's son, is pulled into the story pretty early on. He's her oldest child. He's a tech genius, like I said, and she just thought, I'm going to try to leverage his strengths to be able to help me find his father. But then you learn about Lucas, and Lucas he's all work. He is super like off the charts smart, but he doesn't have a social life. He's afraid of
Mm,
love because he had been kind of burned by a previous relationship. And so all he does is kind of work and bury himself in his work and really is not looking for anybody or anything. All he does is work and works out at the gym and goes home and eats and does it all again every day. He is gay, and that's the LGBT undercurrent there.
mm-hmm.
But it's also really about somebody who, I mean, this guy's father is missing in this scary, foreign country.
Right.
And when I say he's missing, he's presumed dead just because of, how the father disappeared. And he's going through a lot of this emotional turmoil, having a father that he's had kind of good and bad relationships with over his life. And now he's got to either find out that his father is not alive anymore, or he's got to help find his father in a country that's far away with a government and a police department that's not particularly cooperative. And so super high levels of stress there. Plus he's in the tech field, like I said, is U.S. government's one of his biggest clients. He's just got a lot going on and he gets pulled into this whole thing. And then he ends up meeting somebody on his way out to see his mother who happens to be very much like him, another man, but wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor Pastori is the love interest, but he's also an ex-Air Force search and rescue person. He's a pilot. He ends up flying the plane that takes Lucas out to Arizona to see his mom. And again, it's just kind of this, neither one of them is looking for anything.
Mm-hmm.
They're focused. Taylor, the love interest, he has a grown daughter. They've got their own lives. They're in their late 30s, almost early 40s. They're just not really out looking for that. And then they end up being thrown together in this debacle or caper. And they end up connecting and having a really strong bond together. It's a love story. I should say a romantic story. It's a little bit
Right.
early for the love part, but it's a romantic story and it just happens to be two people that normally would never have probably crossed paths end up getting to meet each other. And so to me, it was more about those kind of chance encounters that we have with people that, you sit next to somebody in an airplane or run into somebody in an airport or something, and all of a sudden they end up playing a much bigger role in your life than maybe you thought they would.
Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
plan things like that. So, and when it just
No.
kind of happens, that just kind of makes it more special, like to
Yeah.
me, I think,
Yeah. So my husband and I, we've been together for over 25 years. We have three sons that we adopted internationally who are now adults.
Wow.
And so, a little bit is also reflecting on my own life. Like we both met when we lived in Amsterdam, two Americans living overseas, and we happened to meet and created this whole family and everything over the next couple decades. But then you kind of look back and you're like, wow, if I literally had not gone to this building and I went to the building next to it, none of that would have probably happened. So it was a little bit also of just the happenstance of being in the right place at the right time, and you happen to meet somebody who becomes
Yeah.
your soulmate.
Isn't that crazy? Oh,
It is,
I mean,
yeah.
when you think about it, it's like, wow, I mean, both of your lives could have been so very different.
Hmm. And sometimes, having three adult children, sometimes we're like, it would have been nice if you just went to the other building, Bill. And just you have those those moments when you're like, yeah, wow, when it gets difficult or you're going through some stress. But we say that to each other sometimes as a joke. It has profoundly, obviously impacted our lives, plus our children's lives, and plus our families' lives.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't change anything.
Right, right. So tell us about the technological threat as much as you can without giving too much away. How does it mirror current real world concerns?
A couple things. So this is a technology that actually had been developed in late 1960s. And all the technologies I write about in my books, this one and the new one coming out, are based on technology that exists. These are not, invented.
Hmm.
They're real technologies that exist and were created for whatever reason, usually by the U.S. government or Department of Energy or whatever.
Hmm.
And then they get kind of shelved because, well, we really don't need this, or who would ever think of using this? And then years later, the shoebox gets taken off the shelf and somebody looks inside and says, oh, this would be interesting to use. And so the Poseidon Project is actually a technology that was developed by a group of scientists in the U.S. that was ultimately created to help with basically poverty and drought and famine around the world.
Mm.
The thought being behind, instead of having to do food drops and push pallets of food out of airplanes, that's fine to do, for emergencies. But how do we help these areas become more sustainable in terms of growing their own food or having their own livestock and things like that when they are drastically short of resources that are maybe overabundant, for example, where I live right now
Hmm.
in Ohio. So it was, how do we help these people, and how do we create technology that will actually create a sustainable way for them to live and support each other and support their families, but it's all meant for positive means.
Hmm.
And so somebody finds this technology and they say, wow, this is really cool. This is great. But what would happen if we kind of made it do something a little bit different? And when they figure out that they can actually make this technology do something different, it does the exact opposite. So it would theoretically take a place that was, very fertile, very agrarian, and could potentially turn it into something like a wasteland.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah.
so the physics is the same. It's just reversing it. And so you either create or you destroy.
Right.
And so this technology, the Poseidon technology, ends up becoming the hot potato in terms of, is it going to be used for good or bad? John Halloran, the husband of Molly, who was kidnapped, of course, wants this to be used for good, and so he's trying to secure it to be used for good, but there's a whole underbelly within the world that is trying to use it for something negative, for power, for even economic gain, if you
Yeah.
will. Imagine, let's just say, imagine there was a way to suck oxygen out of the air so that people had to basically pay for oxygen to breathe.
Mm.
It's taking something that we take for granted that we have, it's part of Earth, and basically saying, okay, now you got to pay for it. And if you don't, we can use it to destroy you. So it's got this real kind of sinister underbelly that the Herb Society, the women are quite aware of, but nobody else that's helping them on their adventure to save the husband, nobody else is aware of what this can possibly do.
Wow. Wow. So, what do readers say about your storyline? Have you gotten a lot of feedback?
So the book officially launches on August 26th. I've had a number of reviews that have come in both on Goodreads and also on Amazon. Everybody has said more or less the same thing. One is, you know, it kind of started out like four old ladies living in the desert, and, they end up getting pulled into this adventure, and basically by the end of the book, people are like, I was like on the edge of my seat waiting to see what was going to happen, because it literally went up until the last page in terms of when you found out, ultimately how this was going to be resolved, or if it was going to be resolved. So I think overall people were not expecting the story that they ended up reading.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
So, this is the first book in the series, The Poseidon
Hmm.
Project. What can readers expect from future installments?
The mysteries so far are pretty big mysteries. They're not, like Professor Plum doing something with a candlestick and all. I
Right.
mean, they're not those kinds of whodunit type of mysteries. They're technological challenges that kind of alter the way that we think about things. And so these women who are, very talented, they're ex-physicists, so they're all brilliant scientists. They were school teachers. They are able to think through some really complex problems, plus some of the other characters like Lucas and Taylor who bring their own perspective to things. The next book, I would look at Poseidon as they're individual standalone stories, but there's an underlying theme
Hmm.
between at least the first three books. So the one that will be the next book, book two, and book three will have this underlying theme that is a much, much bigger, more sinister and kind of scary reality that people are potentially facing, that the average person on the street has no idea that they're facing.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you've got this book comes out August
Hmm.
26th. You've written your
Hmm.
second book and you've
Hmm.
planned the third.
Yeah.
Do you see any end right now, or are you just going to keep going, see where it ends up?
Well, I've kind of committed to the first three being more or less related to each other.
Okay.
I think that the underlying theme, however, is, it's ultimately good versus evil. I think it's people who are looking for the good of humanity versus those that want to exploit it. So I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can take it. And the second story is much bigger in terms of I don't want to call it a conspiracy, because it's actually a true, in the book, it's a true
Oh, okay.
theme that is building, that has been under our noses for quite some time, and all of a sudden it gets more or less discovered that this is going on. And again, it's kind of a race against time to try to prevent something which is, you got much, much higher stakes than the Poseidon Project,
Oh,
much higher stakes from happening.
okay.
Yeah.
You're going to be busy for a while.
Well, I'll tell you, as soon as I signed the contract on Poseidon, Wild Rose Press, who's the publisher, they said we'd like a series. And so, I thought, geez, a series? Okay, I never thought about that. But again, now I've got a theme. I love the characters and how they develop and how they interact. And again, they're aging like all of us are. They started out in their late 60s, probably be mid-70s by the second book, and who knows for the third book. But again, it's ultimately this prevailing of good over evil. How are we going to defeat the bad guys, quote unquote? And I think ultimately I have a huge amount of faith in the human race. And I think that overwhelmingly there are people that want more good things than these people that want to destroy or, kind of rebuild the world in their own image and things like that. So it's just like, how do we get people to work together to ultimately make sure that that happens? And, for the good of mankind, not for the good of one person.
Right.
So, and that's going to be kind of the theme going through it.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add today?
I think what I really wanted the message ultimately to be, besides what I mentioned about the forces of good over the forces of not good, what I like about this book, what resonated for me, even though I was writing it, is this whole concept of it's kind of never too late. Let's just say I probably have fewer days ahead of me than I do behind me. But I do think it's that opportunity to constantly reinvent yourself. Just don't give up and think your chapter is over because you've hit a certain age or you've hit a certain stage of your life. And so what I like about this is that the characters continue to evolve. They continue to evolve as individuals. They continue to evolve as friends. They continue to evolve as romantic partners. They continue to evolve and push each other and end up getting pulled into experiences that make them rethink themselves and say, okay, well, maybe I need to do something a little bit differently, or maybe I can use this terrible thing that's happened as something that could be a catalyst to make my life even better. Mm-hmm. So I like to say I'm one of these, I like to have happy endings at the end of stories, but realistic happy endings, that not everything is going to be perfect. There's still be some unanswered questions and, some potential danger out there, but that ultimately the good will prevail.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing a little bit more about you and your work. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the questions and your engagement through this. So, yeah, and certainly hope to have some good news for you after the book launches.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Bill Podojil, author of the Poseidon Project. You can learn more about Bill and his work at ewpodojil.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.